Okay, I want to talk to you today about trauma and post-traumatic growth. What happens after trauma and as a result of trauma, and the wisdom in behind the trauma. So nothing right. Let's think two channels, right? Like two channels, nothing right about what happens with trauma, right? And that's a very difficult and challenging aspect of life, to be able to have to deal with, whether it be a traumatic car accident or a traumatic upbringing or one particular moment growing up where you were traumatized mentally, physically, emotionally, sexually, spiritually. Very difficult, and I am not in any way trying to gloss over the real effects of having to live with trauma. Having personally gone through a tremendous amount of trauma and then being able to work with it and to get under the hood of all that trauma so that I can discover some of the post-traumatic growth or the wisdom in behind trauma. So there are definitely those two worlds, and there's definitely nothing right about trauma, and it needs to be healed, transformed, upgraded. And that's the business I'm in, as you know. But it's also, there was something very deeply moving and wise about on channel 2 about the collateral beauty of wisdom, of trauma, and that is wisdom. So let's talk about the three different kinds of trauma first. One way of thinking about it is that there are these traumatic events that happen that are very direct, and they're more external. They're more, something that happens to you from the outside, and you can very much see that and experience that, whether it be getting beaten as a child, being raped, a car accident. The obvious kind of trauma is those traumatic moments where you were, in high school, in the schoolyard, and there was bullying, and or in junior school, all those kind of direct outside kinds of trauma, and that's one kind of trauma. The second kind of trauma is more indirect. So, making up a story here, little Johnny was being sexually abused by his uncle, and goes to mom, and mom says, "Don't be ridiculous, that's my brother." The original trauma of the sexual abuse was original until the mom said, "No, don't be ridiculous, that never happened." Then this child, the 10-year-old child, little Johnny, then has two things to deal with. One is the direct trauma of the abuse, but worse and deeper than that is that mom, for whatever reason, didn't respond well, didn't believe him, denied it, couldn't get her head around the reality of that, and said, no, that didn't happen, or wasn't there to support, or didn't provide a good, let's back up for a second. If you're a little child and you're learning to ride on your trike and you fall over and you get a big scrape on your knee, the natural thing to do for a child is to run to mom or dad and then, "Oh my God, that's an owie, and it needs to be kissed, needs to be washed, needs to be Band-Aid on it." And of course the kid can hardly wait to get back out there onto the road to be to keep going on the bike. And that's kind of an image of way of thinking about what's supposed to happen with trauma. So sexual abuse from the uncle, child goes to mom responds really well. "Oh my God, brutal, let's deal with this, what the hell's going on, gotta talk to my brother, let's confront him, let's go to bat for that." Then if that all happens, that's just like, yes, that's the right thing to do. And both the incident and the response to the incident is handled well, then the trauma goes way down into somebody's psyche, way down. It's an event that happened, it's a tragic event, it's a challenging event, but it doesn't last forever when there's not a good response from the caregiver then this goes on and on and on. And we keep thinking it has to do with the original trauma of the abuse, but no, it's got to do with the lack of response. So that indirect trauma is the lack of response from the caregiver. And that's difficult, but can be healed. Anything and most things, let's say, can be healed and transformed and upgraded. So does that make sense? Direct trauma, indirect trauma. Third kind of trauma is more atmospheric. And what do I mean by atmospheric? It means that we know this happens, the child gets abused, the response could be there, but the child doesn't say anything because mom or dad's, depression or alcoholism is too loud. Or just in that culture of the family, there's no way that you can express something like this because it's not, there's no room for it atmospherically. So the child decides, no, I'm not going to say anything about this rape that happened because nobody can cope with it, or or mom's depression or dad's depression or mom's alcoholism or dad's alcoholism trumps everything. And so there's no room for this in the air. The financial issues are so loud you can't possibly say something. And what would we want more than anything? What would we want for a child? If your childhood got an owie, got raped, got something terrible happened, you would want that child to come to you. So what kind of climate do you need to create in your home that allows for your children or anybody to be able to come to you and talk to you? Atmospherically, kids know, they sense if somebody can cope with that or not. Or mom, you say something to mom and then she just drops into her own trauma and can't handle that. So these are different kinds of trauma. There are different responses to that. The negative of trauma, the real effects we're talking about, that, their anxiety, depression, a life of, lots of people with trauma, and divorce, and addiction, and not able to hold down relationships. I mean, there's just a real litany of, depending on the extent, the duration, the frequency of the trauma. Obviously, somebody experiencing sexual abuse for 10 years at home has a different kind of effect on the system than a one-off that was responded well, a one-time abuse, sexual abuse, but it was responded to well, and everybody got behind it and dealt with it. There's some real effects of both, but the former is way more challenging, obviously, to deal with, and needs a lot more body-centered psychotherapy. Like, we have to get the feelings out of the body. We have to come down into the body and process things. Otherwise, we get dissociative and we run. The responses are fight, flight, freeze, fake, fine. No, I'm fine. Everything's good, but something's not good. So, does this make sense? So the other thing I wanted to say about trauma was that trauma, nothing right about it. On the other hand, it gets you into a much deeper life if you actually heal it. The positive or the collateral beauty of it, if we can say it that way, is that there's a tremendous amount of deeper living to be had once you work with that. And the second thing about that is that you can, have to go through a lot of healing, a lot of upgrading, a lot of rearranging of your life in order to deal with trauma. On the other hand, it gives you a much deeper purpose and a much deeper, some people say, well, you become the wounded healer. But deeper than that, even, the upside of the post-traumatic growth that can happen as a result of trauma is that you end up discovering, your awakening, because your world is shattered. when trauma happens, boundaries get shattered. Your yes is no. You don't know where love is. You get confused about relationships. You have to renegotiate everything from scratch, and the trust is broken. On the other hand, you get a positive side of it, is that the growth of it is that the wisdom of it is that you end up having to discover and explore what love is, one relationship at a time, and from your own direct experience what that is, as opposed to having love modeled by a mom and dad who fought all day long, and you think that's just normal, and you go up and marry your dad or you marry your mom and it just repeats, the cycle repeats itself, and then you have kids and wonder why your kids do the same thing, right? So we're talking about trauma and post-traumatic growth, and I'm not saying right or wrong. I'm not saying good or bad. I'm not making a judgment. I'm just saying these are the possibilities of these two worlds. So channel 1, nothing right. Channel 2, can we work with this? Can we upgrade it? Creates a much deeper, more fulfilling spiritual life, meaningful life, life of deep purpose and beauty. You access the river of sanity, as Gary Snyder called it. You start to realize that your whole life is being conspired, as a conspiracy, but it's in your favor. It is absolutely brutal that somebody should have to deal with this, and yet this does happen in life, and it's absolutely a doorway to open to explore into a more fulfilling life and more genuinely joyful and prosperous and loving life. Right? This makes sense. So I wanted to say that about both parts of trauma. There's these different kinds. The last thing I might say is that what happens for us, there are two kinds of attachment. I'm going to talk about this maybe next newsletter. The different kinds of attachment that we have. One is two different kinds of needs that we have. Primarily, we have a need for attachment, connected with parents, family, and all the rest of it, but we also have this need for authenticity. And this need for authenticity and the need for attachment get all mixed up and confused when trauma happens, and then there's shaming. So I want to wade into that difficult territory next time, but I wanted to say just about the trauma and the result of that can be of healing that, of transforming that, of upgrading that, can be this post-traumatic growth, post-traumatic wisdom, right? So there you have it. Any questions about this, don't be shy, give me a shout. I'm here for you in these two capacities. One, working with the trauma and processing that, getting that through the body, get the feelings of that coming down into the body and feeling what we need to feel and working with that. And then the other hat I wear, as you know, is to be able to then say, okay, how can I work with this to open up even more doors to deeper purposes and deeper direction in life and more of that peace, love, and Reacher. There you have it. Enjoy. Bye for now.